Okay, so I'm going to talk about the why of our approach to diverse audiences. And like many of us here, obviously Museum Victoria's, we think about audiences a lot. And there's so many different kinds of characteristics of those audiences, and the devil is in the detail of that, etc., that sometimes the big picture gets a little bit blurry because there's so many different ways you can define audiences. And the way we hoped to kind of in some way address this is that finally we actually wrote it in our mission statement, so that we now actually have up front and centre this notion of actually addressing diversity in our audiences. And I think that that's a very important step, that you overt the fact that this is something you're actually going to do. Often we do a lot of talking about it, but actually our statements don't actually reflect the fact that this is what we want to do. And it's true that at Museum Victoria, we do have diverse audiences. We track those audiences. They come to our museums, our programs, our websites and our digital experiences. And there are typical visitors that go to each of our museums, for example, but they are different from museum to museum. So we have families from the West Science Works, we have older single and old couple adults and international tourists that go to Immigration Museum, and there's kind of a mix of families, tourists and adults that go to our Melbourne Museum. So the diversity in our audiences actually often exists between the different kinds of experiences we offer. It's in the at each museum that we're actually wanting to try and actually increase pockets of differences. And often diversity is there, but our measurement of it is either not done at all or not sufficiently sophisticated to capture the differences. Sometimes, though, we actually are able to do that. And this is just an example of our touring hall program, where we have a fairly comprehensive evaluation program of our touring hall exhibitions. And what we have found is that these exhibitions do create diversity in our audiences, where they do attract many different kinds of audiences: economic difference, education, location, ethnicity, age, life stage, occupation. And this one here is just giving you a bit of an idea of the different kinds of exhibitions we've had more recently in the touring hall. And these are the quintiles, the socio-economic quintiles, that they break up the community in terms of those that are well-resourced and those that perhaps are less resourced than others. And you can see that some of these individual exhibitions, say Titanic and Tut, for example, they had the capacity to draw in more people who are from lower socio-economic quintile than some of the other exhibitions. And so we did see a lot of diversity in these touring hall programs. However, they're multi-million-dollar projects, and our everyday program is probably a little bit different. So what do we do in the everyday? So what I'd like to do now is talk you through a framework that reflects a little bit of the current thinking that we have at Museum Victoria. And I'd have to say that at the moment, just because we have this statement in our mission statement about diversity, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're absolutely doing everything that we should be doing at this moment. This model is more about perhaps a heart state rather than a head state. So it's something about what we would like to happen, not necessarily that this is happening consistently on a day-to-day basis. But getting it embedded into our work, perhaps practice, is probably the most difficult aspect. So here's the model. So the basis of this model is the fact of that, based on two pieces of work: getting audiences and then keeping them. It's a twofold activity. The easiest audiences to get, of course, are those who are already engaged, those core audiences. But to keep them, you've got to actually work at continuing to deliver on their needs. To get new or developing audiences also takes concerted effort. This framework proposes that relevant parts of the organisation need to agree on and prioritise those audiences they're going to target. So often in organisations, you've got one part, the bigger organisations, you've got one part working on this audience and you've got the other part working on another audience. And that in some ways perhaps doesn't have the greatest opportunity for impact. But if everyone agrees that the target audiences they might like, and you might work on a number at one time, then you can actually focus on them, and everyone's work is dedicated to getting them. And once you attract them, their needs must continue to be met. And in this way, those developing audiences then become part of your core audience. And then that core starts to diversify because you're including these new audiences over and over and over again into the core audiences. The fundamental benefits of this kind of a model is that there is that potential for greater impact because the audience is at the centre of it. You identify an audience and you actually cater to their needs. The work also becomes centralised and everyone is focused on the same outcome. The work's collaborative, smarter and less competition for resources. And for me personally, working on this model, even though it's a desire, it also gives the opportunity to do in-depth audience research, which can actually help to inform identifying who those developing audiences might actually be. Of course, that's a desire, but there are other things that people have actually talked about, how you target audiences and what we could also be doing. Nina Stanton talks about the difference between just targeting different audiences and creating social bridging between them. And it's the notion that if you just target audiences, you might end up with spikes. That looks very round, that curve, in terms of development of audiences, but they're really just spikes made up by different audiences. What Nina Simons talks about is trying to find ways to connect across these audiences so that you can create experiences that a number of different kind of audiences can actually share in. And finally, just before Georgie talks about some of our programs, one of the things that I think it would be very important is that if we think diversity is such a good thing, we have to promote it, not as a nice to have, but as a must have. And we all have to, as suggested by Elaine Goering, go to unfamiliar lengths to truly welcome and serve new audiences. We will need to be open to listening, change, confronting unspoken bias about the right ways of engaging with our institutions. And doing that can be very scary and risky. And Georgie's going to give us some idea of the unfamiliar territory that she's gone into in the search for diversity at Museum Victoria.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Lucky last. So, other way. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm currently working at Melbourne Museum. I've also worked at the Immigration Museum and short bursts at Science Works. So Carolyn and I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to give examples from all three museums, looking at three different audience approaches. So first up, cultural festivals at the Immigration Museum. So these have been running, wrong way guys. Okay, these have been running for over 10 years at the Immigration Museum. They started with audiences of 500 to 600 people, mainly from the community, and now they attract almost 3,000 people. They're bursting at the seams. And their success is due to community collaboration, very similar to Shepparton Art Museum model. For each festival, a community committee is invited to co-curate the festival. The festival focuses on celebrating migrant life in Melbourne, not on past conflict, so the focus is very clear, the purpose is clear. Immigration Museum staff work with the community for up to a year. They go to community events, they invite the community into the museum, so a very deep, meaningful relationship is formed between the museum staff and that community. This relationship ensures that the community feels welcome when the time of the festival or the event comes around. In recent years, festivals have grown to include an intercultural model where multiple communities are invited to work together around a common theme, sweets or in this case, chocolate. Sorry. I shall do. Okay. So around this common theme. So in this case, you can see here the Melt Festival was around chocolate, and this enabled multiple communities to come together, to meet one another and to meet staff, and also to continue our relationship with those communities. And these two have been really popular. We have another one, the Islamic Arts Festival, on the 24th of November that you encourage you all to come to. And I think what these festivals have shown us is that they demonstrate a way of engaging an audience, a way in which building a meaningful relationship and working together collaboratively can actually ensure that audience will come into the museum. Another brilliant example of this at the moment is the First Peoples exhibition at Melbourne Museum, and if you haven't seen that, I really urge everyone to see it. Again, that was a collaboration with the community. A community group was formed called the Elenge Group, and we've worked together with that community for over 4 years, and it's a really quite exceptional exhibition. So that's one example there, I think, of working together and means of getting a diverse audience into a museum. The next example I wanted to show you was out at ScienceWorks. Quite different, Little Kids Day In. This is a different program aimed at attracting parents and carers and their children under 6. And for this program, ScienceWorks staff considered, what do young children want and need from ScienceWorks? And the answer was that they needed a safe space to play. So what could make ScienceWorks more safe and appealing for this audience? And really the answer was no big school groups. And you know, that I think after extensive consideration and business planning, it was trialled and it was deemed to be very successful. It was on a Monday and there were no school groups. Parents and carers and their young children were invited in with the promise of enjoy activities without school groups. Now, it sounds pretty simple, but as most of you know, school groups are the bread and butter of museums, and it took us a lot of courage to say no for one day. But as I mentioned, it worked. Parents and carers have come in their droves. We had one yesterday with over 1,000 people come in. And really, what they liked was the fact that there weren't big groups. And look, I've chosen these photos here just to show you something else that's done for these days is a lot of activities on the floor to make this audience very welcome and to show that it's for them. I think this success of Little Kids Day In shows how a venue can slightly change its offer to attract the audience, in this case the visitor mix. As you can see also from the advertisement here that I put up, the marketing has been very targeted. So there's bold colours and bold language. So parents and carers know that this program is very much for them. So finally, I'll move on to Smart Bar as promised at the start. Now, Smart Bar happens at Melbourne Museum, and this is something that I've been working on very closely for the last couple of years. And look, as most of us in the sector do, we at Melbourne Museum spent many an hour pondering the question of young adults. We all want them, how do we get them? So we were also closely watching Jurassic Lounge up at Sydney's Australian Museum. It runs on Tuesday evenings for a season and it was proving really popular. There's one happening at the moment, I think. So we got together a working group with public programs, marketing, PR and curatorial staff to consider a solution. And we had loads and loads of ideas, as you can imagine. Nighttime cinema on the plaza, rock stars, celebrities, free drinks, jelly wrestling. They were doing jelly wrestling in Sydney. So we thought, should we do that at Melbourne Museum? And, you know, it wasn't gelling. And you know, we even approached popular online media site Broadsheet for a partnership to develop content. They weren't interested, so we thought, you know, we would just have to answer the same question that ScienceWorks did for little kids, and what do young adults want and need from Melbourne Museum? We realised that young adults want somewhere welcoming and just open at a time when they can come. Museums are open during working hours. It's not very accessible. And also the bar and the DJ. We ran into a bit of criticism at the start about a bar and alcohol, and do young people need alcohol to have fun? And I don't think the bar does that. It's just to create a familiar and welcoming environment for this audience. But then we thought, you know, there are plenty of bars in Melbourne. Why would you come to Melbourne Museum? Why is that any different? And then we just thought we need to make this bar really museum-y. So we started with a live dissection. So we brought some of our research and our curatorial staff out from behind the scenes and onto the floor, and we did a dissection of a bird, and we showed something that museums do all the time, was research into different animals and taxidermy. We had a taxidermy display, we did talks from curators on dinosaurs, deep sea marine life. And you know what, it was pretty amazing. The first Smart Bar attracted 1,100 people, and they weren't just an audience that pre-purchased their tickets and all were there at 6 o'clock on the dot waiting to come in, and they were 20, 30-something adults. And it was unbelievable. It was nothing, complete sellout, nothing that we had ever anticipated could happen with this audience. And look, something I think that also worked for this was the marketing, and that's why I've put so much ridiculous marketing on this slide for you. It's very, very different to the Little Kids Day In, and I probably don't need to remind you, but little kids, the bright, bold colours, even that sort of simple font, with Smart Bar. It was vintage colours, different text, and we actually spoke to our advertising agency and they came up with the name Smart Bar as well, something that was a bit different. You know, we were looking at Jurassic Lounge up in Sydney, the Vienna Lounge here at the NGV. We didn't think we were quite as sexy as those venues. We thought, you know, we need to be true to ourselves, be museumy, and Smart Bar kind of did that. So this Thursday we're having the 7th Smart Bar in the series, Welcome to the Jungle up there. We're going to do a live leech feeding. Leeches feed on humans, so we're going to put someone's arm in a jar of leeches. But it's all science, it's all real stuff that happens. There'll be talks on possums, frogs, explorers, parasites, eating insects. So Smart Bar, like Little Kids Day In, I think demonstrates how a venue can change itself just a little bit to be more accommodating. For young adults, it's open after hours, no kids, a bar and a DJ. However, I think Smart Bar's really shown us that you can be really true to your own nature and still be popular. You don't need jelly wrestling. You can actually do some of this interesting, really museum-y stuff or gallery stuff, and people still love it. Look, I never thought, you know, of all these Smart Bars, we've had talks on syphilis, talks on who poisoned Phar Lap, you know, how animals have sex, explorers in the Antarctic, all of it's been popular, and I never would have thought it in a million years to this audience. So I'd like to finish today with a quote from a multicultural arts marketing specialist, Donna Walker-Kuhn, who I spent some time with in 2007. I got to see firsthand how she was driving visitation from African American communities to places like the Lincoln Center and the Met in New York. And Donna's strategy is about extending the invitation. She says, if you don't invite people in, how do they know that they're welcome? She says you've got to invite people to the party, and I'm hoping that I've showed you 3 examples of different parties that we've had at the museums, different sorts of invitations that we've been really lucky to have worked. So thank you very much for your time.